something? All right, cool. All right. Technical difficulties are over. All right, make sure you sign up for RITSEC Blue Team. Good opportunity to learn some blue team skills. Blue team workshops will be coming up, so make sure you sign up soon. All right. Did you guys do a co-op this summer? We want you to fill out this QR code and tell us about it. Good information for us here. Make sure you guys scan that QR code. All right. Make sure you guys still sign up for the Let's Worst trip happening next weekend. I'm pretty sure it's 27th. It's a lot of fun. You get to do a lot of walking and see a lot of beautiful nature. So make sure you guys sign up for that still. Sign-ups are still open. I'll keep it up for those still scanning. How about that sunny weather we have? Right? It's really nice out. All right. We good? All right. Guys, the VM download for today's demos will be in the demo help announcements channel. We will also announce this later on when demos begin. So if you guys don't know where the VM download, it will be in the demo help announcements channel. All right. Now we have Intro to Windows by James Southcott. What? That's the voting is next Friday. Yeah. Can we share him the link to the QR code? Can we share? Can you share James the Zoom thing so he could join in and share screen? So then he can have it on his computer.
Am I just using your laptop now?
Just use his laptop for now.
All right, that's fine.
That's all
Let's
right.
use this. Let me make sure everything is. All right, we should be all good. Huh? Okay, I'm still on. All yours.
Thank you, Adam. All right. Thank you guys for coming. This is the education presentation for this week, Intro to Windows. A little bit about me, big Jesus guy. I just finished my first internship at Apple Information Security. A third year honors, BSMS, cybersecurity, yada, yada, yada. I am local. I'm from Rochester, New York. If you have any questions about Rochester, feel free to ask me. Big Bills fan, big dubs last night. I'm also the CCDC captain, so if you're interested in competing for RIT on our CCDC team, that is our blue team. We compete against other top colleges in the area. It's a lot of fun. First tryout is tonight. Go ahead and grab the CCDC tryouts role in the Roll Join channel. I've actually got to drop an announcement for that. So yeah, first tryout is tonight. I'm also the Red Team Chief. Red Team recruiting every Wednesday from 6 to 7 in Air Gap. Be there. Also on the club volleyball team, play a lot of other sports. Big into country music and line dancing. Pretty much every Thursday and Saturday you can find me at Nashville's. And I also love Chick-fil-A. So to understand Windows, we must start from the beginning with the cavemen and how Bill Gates and Paul Allen built it in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It started with MS-DOS, which was the original, just, little command line type thingy. And they quickly evolved. MS-DOS started with just a command line interface. You could literally just type. It's what we now know as basically CMD. You could only really do one thing. There was one whole thread on this whole thing. You could only do one thing at a time. Windows 1, though, they added a GUI, what we all know and love. Some early apps, calculator, paint, notepad, terminal, yada, yada. Started getting the windows in Windows number 2, where we had overlapping windows and you can multitask and do multiple things at once. iPad just got this. So you can move apps around. This is where they added the Office suite. So Word, Excel, Office, PowerPoint, all that stuff that we know and love and use pretty much every day now. Windows 3, more stuff was added. Still nothing interesting yet, though, so we're going to go through that pretty quick. Now, Windows NT, this is important to know. This is when Windows released new technology in like 1995. Windows NT is still used. So all of the things where you're like, wow, why is Windows so crap? This is why. It's because of Windows NT. It stood for new technology. It allegedly brought security and stability with NTFS. It did actually bring in user authentication for the first time, access control lists, file permissions, and they also had a hardware abstraction layer. Windows 95 brought some more UI stuff. Windows Explorer, so we had a web browser for the first time, or sorry, Internet Explorer and Windows Explorer, yada yada. Windows 2000, still not interesting. But this is where we got Event Viewer and Task Manager, the first things that we're going to dive in a little bit. Event Viewer is how to view all of the logs for your system. Who here is competing in IRSEC or has signed up for IRSEC? That's a lot of hands. You're going to want to get familiar with both Event Viewer and Task Manager. These are going to be really helpful for Windows. They're GUI tools that allow you to view important things going on in your system. So if you think red team activity has happened, you can just go ahead and check Event Viewer. You're going to want to research, you know, if I know red team might be doing some things like maybe turning off my services, adding users, deleting users, that activity is going to show up in Event Viewer. You're going to want to research what the event IDs for those things might be like, what activity that's going to look like in Event Viewer. Go ahead and maybe try to simulate some red team activity, and then like on a machine that you're doing, and then go into Event Viewer and see what that looks like. Right? You're going to want to know what these things look like before it happens to you. And Event Viewer is where you're going to want to do that. Task Manager, also great for seeing running processes, services, a very user-friendly way to see all that stuff. There's much more in-depth and intricate ways we'll look at in the next couple slides, but to get you started, Task Manager is a great way to just, you know, look at what's running on your computer. Now, Active Directory, this released with Windows 2000, I think we're on. And this is really what makes Windows so important to understand, because just about 95, is Danny here? He knows the statistic. 95% of, you know, businesses are running Active Directory in some form or fashion today. Active Directory domain services is really what you got to know. It is a hierarchical structure to organize and manage users, computers, printers, everything that would be networked within your company. It makes it very easy to apply policy, and most importantly for our business folks, it makes it very easy to eat other companies into your company by basically doing mergers and whatnot. And there's also a whole bunch of cloud stuff. We're not going to talk about the cloud because that could be its own presentation that I've also done last year. So the most important thing to understand about AD, it's a hierarchical structure with things called forests. That is the highest level, that is the very top of the hierarchical structure. So that is going to be your domain. So google.com, rit.edu. And that is where the schema for everything else is defined. That's defined at the forest level. Now, what's the schema? What can exist within your forest? The attributes held by these objects. So users, computers, that's where that stuff is defined. This is a good example of a hierarchical structure, and you can see how I was talking about how it makes it really easy to eat other companies. So reskit.com, I don't even know what that is. It's just what was in the example. Let's say they buy acquired.com. You can just take that forest and insert it into your forest. So it makes it really easy to buy other companies, so business people like it as well. Now for the actual interesting and technical part of it, the domain. That is how you partition a forest, so you have multiple domains. So for example, what's an RIT domain? mycourses.rit, no, that's not a good example. main.ad.rit.edu, right? So that is whenever you log in with Shibboleth, you will like see a redirect to main.ad.rit.edu, which is where your credentials get sent. That is basically one of the domains inside of RIT's forest. There are definitely a whole bunch of other domains. We don't see them as students. There's probably a test.ad.rit.edu, a dev.ad.rit.edu. So you're able to make all of these domains for whatever your use cases, however you want to partition your environment, and it's really useful, really easy, and it really scratches that organizational itch, right? So this is where you define users and groups, authentication, authorization. An organizational unit is what you put things in to apply policy, right? So if I have a group of users, let's say HR, and they should not be able to open the command line on the computer, right? Because why would they need to be able to do that? I'll take a group, I'll put all of the users that are in HR in that group, and then I'll add that group into the organizational unit. Now, all the policy applied to that organizational unit is then applied to these users. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions? That should make sense. And that policy will basically define they're not able to open the command line in PowerShell. Obviously, you're going to do much more stuff than that, much higher level. That's just a really simple example. The groups then used to apply permissions. So let's say that might be HR is the only set of users that can access the HR printer, right? Because this printer is going to be in a specific location, going to have sensitive documents because it's HR. So that's how you use groups. You know, you're obviously going to want to use these to apply permissions to your entire company, your entire business, your environment. Then there's also sites. So this is for like physical location type of stuff. There's some cool things you can do with that, but not as important as organizational units and groups. So this is a much bigger look at the hierarchical structure of AD. If you can remember one thing from AD, it's that it's a hierarchical structure to organize users, groups, and policy. So let's see, I don't even remember what this diagram looks like. So yeah, these are examples of different users that have been added to different groups, giving them different permissions. And then this is a group policy, which gets applied to an organizational unit. So, you know, desktop settings, so users can't change their desktop wallpaper, for example. Lots of businesses will have that. You can only use the company provided wallpaper because it looks cool. And you don't want to accidentally install malware on your desktop, which can happen, by the way. So like that's a user configuration that's probably applied to the whole company, right? And then you can apply those organizational units, different scopes, however you want to. So really good organizationally. Domains. So the, Microsoft's implementation of domains is the Active Directory Domain Controller, typically just called the DC. It is the most important computer in the domain. Once you get to classes like crypto, auth, you'll learn about Kerberos and the KDC. This is the KDC. It's the Kerberos Distribution Center. It is what manages authentication, authorization, and the secrets for the entire domain. It is very important. If it gets compromised, you're kind of screwed. All authentication and authorization happens with the domain controller. Essentially, clients reach out to the domain controller, and the domain controller grants them access to things. We're not going to get more intricate in this presentation because I could talk about it for 20 minutes. There's also the Active Directory data store, which is basically all important information for the domain. It also all sits on the domain controller. A couple interfaces to reach out to it. LDAP is the most common lightweight directory access protocol. LDAP is super useful to know because it is not just a Active Directory thing. It is used in all sorts of environments. And then there's also components for storing database, and you can see like this is one of the most important folders in Windows, C, Windows NTDS. So, you know, if you're on blue team and red team is able to destroy that, you know, they might be able to destroy your domain. This is what I was talking about earlier. Group policy objects are a way to apply policy to organizational units. They're basically a way to set a bunch of settings. So if I definitely recommend just like opening up Windows, creating a domain controller, and then going into group policy, Luke, what is it called? Group Policy Management Console, GPMC. And from there, you can create group policy objects, which is basically just you can go in and set any rule that you might want to, right? So think of this as a really good way. Think of maybe you work in government, right? And depending on your role, there's going to be different standards of compliance that your specific computer has to meet, right? So you might have a group policy object for level 1, level 2, level 3, right? And if you are working on really sensitive work, you're going to be applied to group policy object 3. Basically, your computer is going to be so unusable that you can literally only use it for your exact job purpose. You're going to hate it, right? But if you get applied to group policy object 1 that's not as restrictive, you might be able to do a lot more. So group policy objects, really flexible, really easy way to apply all sorts of policy and whatnot. Like I said, group policies are applied to organizational units. Those organizational units can contain other groups, other organizational units, all types of organization. Now, users, computers, and groups are actual users and their computers. User represents an account, obviously. A computer is domain joined. So by default, when you just open your computer, it's just like a standalone laptop, right? But then there's a couple things you can do to domain join it, which means it's now attached to your Active Directory domain. And then it can be organized into that organizational unit stuff, into the group stuff. Permissions can be applied to it and whatnot. Yeah, that's pretty much everything interesting there. Trust. So this is how you want forests to be able to talk to each other. So useful for mergers between companies and whatnot. If you, let's say you have, you know, Forest 1 and Forest 2, and Forest 1, you know, that's going to be a company, and you have Forest 2, that's another company. Forest 1 buys Forest 2. You're going to want to have, like, not have to reset up everything inside Forest 1. You want to just take Forest 2 and basically let them authenticate to Forest 1, right? So that lets Forest 1 know that Forest 2 can be trusted in a certain level of way. You're obviously going to assign those settings. But basically, you don't have to recreate the whole infrastructure now. You just like acquire the company and say, hey, those guys, they're good now. They're with us, right? And now they'll be able to use your computers, use your systems, and whatnot. Makes mergers really easy, a lot less of a hassle. And you can organize these trusts in all sorts of ways. Make them real complex or real simple. Okay, that was Active Directory. Does anybody have any questions about Active Directory? Because it's pretty important to know. It's definitely a good tool to be able to understand for job interviews and whatnot. Does anybody have any questions before I move on to the rest of this crappy operating system? All right, so next after Windows 2000 was Windows XP. This is where stuff started to get good. Still based on Windows NT, but now we have x64 instead of just 32-bit. Apps could be updated. We added Windows Firewall, one of the most important things. So if you're competing in IRSEC, you're also going to want to pay attention to this. Windows Firewall is one of the most important things. It is a host-based firewall, so that means the firewall for just the computer, not your network. You can filter on all sorts of things. You can make these really simple rules. You have your inbound rules, your outbound rules, apply rules, deny rules, TCP rules, UDP rules, port rules, general rules, custom rules. You can do whatever you want with it. You can use it through PowerShell. There's all sorts of ways to control this, and it is really important for getting red team out of your machine. If you set a good firewall, like we did at CCDC, by the end of the comp, you'll have a green board, which we did. The firewall is one of the most important things. So if you can, just start experimenting with it. Just start setting rules. Try to understand what it works. Try to understand the ports that your services are going to run on. If you're going to have Active Directory, look up what ports Active Directory use, and then maybe limit it to those ports. Don't break stuff, though, so you're going to want to test it. Just start messing around with it and getting used to it. Maybe there'll be an inject that tells you to set a firewall rule to block some malicious threat actor or something. Just start, go into, not on your laptop, but I'd recommend opening up a VM and just going into Windows Firewall and just start changing stuff. See what breaks, see what doesn't, see what makes it more secure. Just try stuff. Windows 8, this looks so terrible that I'm going to skip it right away. Windows 10, this was announced in 2014 and is actually about to get deprecated, sadly, in about a month. They brought back the desktop from Windows 8, and they also implemented Windows Sandbox, which is a pretty cool way to sandbox some stuff. They also implemented Microsoft Edge to take over Internet Explorer, which is 100 times better. I added a setting app snipping tool. And then Windows 11, they did some UI stuff, yada, yada, yada. Okay, now for the actual fun and cool stuff. The file system. So how do files on Windows work? It uses this thing called NTFS. So you remember from Windows NT, Windows New Technology. Well, this is the new technology file system. It's modern, secure, and fast. Not really. Every drive is a letter, so the default one is C. You guys probably all see in your operating systems, C, Windows, C, users. Well, you can make however many you want. You can do D, E, F. You'll notice when you plug in a USB drive, it'll show up as D. You plug in another one, it'll show up as E or F. I think certain ones typically show up as F. Well, you can just make as many of these letters as possible. I don't know if you're limited to 26 characters, but you can just keep making them, right, if you want to partition your file system more and more. C is the default, though. Some important directories for when you're doing stuff in IRSEC that you might want to pay attention to. /users contains all of the users on your system. Pay attention to that. Look at it. Look at the users. Look at the approved list of users. When you get into IRSEC, you'll have a packet that shows you what users are allowed to be on your system and supposed to be on your system. There's going to be a lot of users in /users that are not supposed to be on your system because I'm going to put them there as red team. Trust. So maybe take a look at that. Maybe it'll look good on your incident response report. Maybe take a screenshot of all the users in there. Windows System 32. This is where just about everything important goes. Anything important to the operating system found in System 32. Stores all of the executables. So when you run Calculator, when you run Paint, when you run, I don't know, what's a simple app? Just basically any application that comes with Windows, it comes from System 32. Also, all the DLLs. I don't know if I talk about DLLs in this presentation. I kind of forgot. I made it a year ago. Also, then there's /program files and /program data. That's exactly what it sounds like. Program files is where all of the files for apps that you download are stored, and then program data is basically all the cached data from those applications. So when you download Minecraft for the first time, it's in /program file /Minecraft. And then when you run Minecraft for the first time, it puts a bunch of files in /program data /Minecraft. that will then make the performance better essentially for every next time that you run Minecraft. The registry. So if you guys remember in Linux, everything is a file. Well, unfortunately in Windows, everything is not a file. There are the file system and then there's the registry. And the registry is completely separate from the file system, but the registry is pretty much the most important thing in Windows because it's every setting, every configuration that you can possibly think of. It's literally just Windows' .conf files. Values can either be strings, binaries, or integers, typically. It's most often you'll see integers. Every key is stored in a hive, so that's basically a file path. So you'll see like this. So this stands for H key local machine. So that is all the registries for your machine. And then, win stations, yada, 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 yada. Once it's in a hive, then it's a key value relationship. So all of you in 123 or 127, when you learn about dictionaries, you'll learn about key value relationships. This is one of those. So the key, for example, in this one, security layer, and then the value is set to 2. So when I talk about string, binary, integer, that is what the value is going to be, right? So when you have a application, it'll maybe look for certain settings. It'll go to a certain hive that it controls, and then it'll read different keys, and the value will affect the running of this application, right? So for an example, this is a key, a hive key and value for remote desktop protocol, right? So remote desktop has access to all of the keys within the RDP TCP hive, and then when it runs, it checks the key security layer and checks the value too, and then it knows, okay, we need to encrypt all traffic. Registry, very important to understand and very easy to screw up. So you're gonna wanna be careful. This is also something I would boot up a VM and just start poking around. See what is where, see what is interesting, what breaks if you do stuff and stuff starts blue screening, right? This is definitely something I would just start poking around with. You'll notice every time you save the registry, it gives you like a little message like, be careful, make a backup of the registry because you could break your operating system, something like that. So very important, very easy to screw up though. Processes. So you have your executable, your .exe, right? But this is just a file sitting on your file system. And then you double click it to run it. Now it's a process. It's running. It's not just a file. Processes can be viewed in Task Manager like we looked at earlier, but there's some better Windows-specific stuff that other people made and then Windows kind of bought called Procmon and Proc Explorer. Those are just better sysinternals ways to look at processes. We'll look at those more. Some common process names. MS Edge is Microsoft Edge. These are kind of things that you're going to also want to just start poking around in your process list and understand what's normal and understand what's not normal, right? So maybe I remember my first IRSec, I looked at MSMPENG. I'm like, what the heck is that? But now that I've been doing it for a while, I see that I know, oh, that's Defender, right? So I know that's not suspicious. And I see, I got rid of the funny ones for like RDP. So like certain, normal things will have really stupid names for some reason. Why? I don't know. Microsoft decided it should be that way. But you're going to want to know what those might look like so that when you get into competition and you see something stupid, you don't kill it and accidentally bring down your service thinking you're kicking out red team. One of the more important ones, LSAS, this runs as a process, not as a service, but it is all of the authentication for Windows. It runs as a protected process, which is essentially a few things that Microsoft allows your executable to implement so that when you run the process, you can't inject into it in a funny few other things, but basically it makes it kind of secure. LSAS essentially takes your password and checks it against your account's password with some hashing. Unfortunately, all of those password hashes are stored in memory. So if the LSAS process is running and you're able to get access, administrator access to read the memory of LSAS, so when the file is on the file system, there's just the raw bytes on the file system. Once it's running in memory, there's also the process memory. So if you're able to look at that for LSAS, you're actually going to be able to see the hashed value of your password. And then if you have a really weak password, you could then take that value offline and crack the hash and find the password. There used to be a demo for this. It was kind of hard, and I think like 2 of us were the only people to figure it out last year. So I don't think it's in the demos for this week, but there's still some really cool demos. So service. This is Microsoft's version of what in Linux we call a daemon. It is essentially a process, but more important and should always be running. it is usually more core to the operating system. So for example, on the right, we see DNS client and DHCP client. Those should pretty much always be running because they're pretty important to the operating system, right? Oh, I have a couple other ones. You can view all of these in the services app. This is another one you're definitely going to want to check if you're blue teaming IRSec, because we will make our stuff services because it's a really good way to make sure your stuff is always running. Some important ones. This is the funny one. So for example, if you're in IRSec and you see term service for the first time, I might think that's malware, not knowing it's actually the way you're accessing your machine through remote desktop. So this is something you're also definitely going to want to open up and just see what's normal. See what is common. That is a big theme. When you're learning operating systems for the first time, just open up a fresh install of them and see what is actually there when you install it. And then when you go to a competition and red team has dropped 1,000 things on your machine, you'll know what's supposed to be there and what's not supposed to be there. Sysinternal, so this is what I mentioned earlier, is essentially a big suite of tools that honestly I have no idea who made it, but then Microsoft bought it. They don't come default in Windows, but you can download them. And it is a whole bunch of different tools. So Process Explorer and Process Monitor are task manager, except for better and on crack. They manage and monitor file systems, processes, event properties, essentially everything you would want to know about a running process you can see in there. You can see all of its threads, all of the libraries it's loaded, all of the actions it takes, all of the API calls it makes. Super good for incident response purposes, incident response writing. At the end of IRSec, you guys will have to write an incident response report. So if you're able to get into Process Monitor and Process Explorer and really see and understand what our malware is doing, that will impress us from the red team side, and we'll want to give you guys more points for that. TCP, another good one. TCP view, sorry, another good one to kind of see the activity that is going on your machine. So if you see, some processes making connections to weird IP addresses and ports, you might want to kill them. Some more auto runs. By far the most important sysinternals tool. As red team, we're going to try to make sure you don't have access to it. But auto runs is essentially how to kill all the different persistence mechanisms on your machine. I won't go into it more than that. If you want to look into auto runs, download it and see what it does. List DLLs is pretty important to try to find DLL injection and whatnot. And then strings is also super important. You'll learn about strings when you take 201. It essentially shows different commands run by a binary. That's kind of correct. I don't know why. I wrote this a long time ago. It essentially shows all of the operating system calls that a certain binary might make. You can basically run strings on an executable or an application and see more or less what it does overall once you kind of look at them and try to put a picture together of what it does. Control panel. This is the really easy, GUI way to see all of the system configurations and administrative tools. This will take you to most of the things that I've already talked about, where to go to users, where to go to your network settings, where to go to your firewall and whatnot. This is the one-stop shop to go to everything that you might want to go to when setting up security stuff. Now PowerShell. I think this is one of the last major things I want to hit on. PowerShell is the super easy command line interface to do everything in Windows. There is also a command line in Windows. PowerShell is much better, much easier. It is basically the one-stop shop for everything task automation, and yeah, it's super nice. All of the PowerShells are structured in the exact same way, in verb-noun format, and you'll see that in a second. So, for example, I mean, the first three aren't like navigating the file structure when you're in PowerShell. CD, ls, pwd, all the same as Linux. But when you get into processes and services, we have get process, get service, start process, start service. So you can see it's in that verb noun format. And what makes this really nice is, I think I have it on the next slide. Yeah. When you don't know what you want to, when you don't know the actual PowerShell commandlet, but you know what you want to do, you can kind of just start typing it out. Like if I want to get information about my computer, I might just start typing get tag computer and then hit tab and let it finish it out for me, and it'll write out get computer info, which is what I really wanted to know, right? So that is the super awesome thing about PowerShell. It's super intuitive. The documentation is incredible. If you just type in the commandlet or what you want to do in a commandlet, there are Microsoft Learn docs on it, which is just the Microsoft's documentation for everything. It's super good, super well documented, super organized. It's just awesome. We do a ton of scripting with it on CCDC, and it is just an awesome tool. Some of the other interesting ones, users and groups is pretty important to know, especially for stuff like RITSEC, get AD user, get user, all that, get local user. You're gonna wanna look into those before you go into RITSEC when you're managing with users. And yeah, so I talked about the PowerShell structure. Now scripting. If you don't want to do all this manually, right, you can open up PowerShell and just start typing get user, get computer info, yada, yada, yada. But that gets repetitive and it's kind of slow. So what you can do is you can take all of these PowerShell commandlets and put them into a script. It is basically just a text file, and you just put the command one after another what you want to run. And now it's a script. It can end in .ps1, and then you can run this script, and it'll do all of it at once. Really easy, really awesome, super helpful for automating things you want to do in a red versus blue competition. I think this is the last thing. Defender, built-in antivirus that comes with Windows. For IRSec, not relevant at all because we're gonna blow up like the crap out of it. Like it won't be usable. Defender is great for your personal laptop. It has most of the features of a normal antivirus. It has static and dynamic analysis of malware on your computer. So what this means is it will statically analyze the binaries on the file system. So it'll look at the files, see if these files have any interesting properties that might make it malware. And then it'll also look at the running processes that we talked about earlier, and it'll look at the memory of these processes to see if the running process is doing anything interesting that it wouldn't necessarily be able to tell from the file on the file system. Also, there's background scanning, so you don't have to, manually click run scan, run scan, run scan. It'll do it for you all the time. Security intelligence updates. Unfortunately, Dan LaChance isn't here. It does some additional firewall stuff, so it makes sure that your firewall can't be tampered with. And also, whenever you're in Edge or Chrome or something, and you see, you try to download something that you didn't realize was malware, it'll be like, sorry, couldn't download this. That's Defender, making sure you're safe. So, I just talked for like a half hour, 45 minutes. Anyone have any questions? No? If you want to learn more, oh yeah, question? What do you mean by opaque?
Like hard to like read to see, like it's like
Yeah, I will.
could it be like quite difficult to like
Understand what you're looking at is what, yeah. So the question was, can the registry be pretty opaque, and by that, like hard to understand? Is that like, yeah. So yeah, the first time you look at the registry, it can be a little intimidating. The best way to understand the registry, I wouldn't go into it and just like open up the registry editor and start looking for stuff. I would first Google how to control like registry settings for blank, right? So maybe I want to control registry settings for firewall, right? And that'll show you where those settings are. Then navigate to that and then start poking around. Because if you just go into it arbitrarily, it's a maze, right? There's like hundreds of thousands of settings in the registry, right? So like if you just go in there and start poking around, you're not going to actually find anything useful. So I would take something like, I don't know if calculator would have registry settings, but the one I always use as an example is remote desktop protocol, right? So Google registry settings for remote desktop, and then you can go in there and then you can see maybe 5 or 10 settings, and then you really understand what those settings are do. So that's how I recommend if you want to kind of de-obfuscate and make it simpler to understand when looking at the registry. Anything else before I make another? Yeah, Noble. Yeah, so as soon as we get into competition, we want to understand like the environment. Sorry, the question was, on CCDC, we use PowerShell scripting a lot. So what is an example of one task we might want to automate with this PowerShell scripting? That's a good question, Noble. So an example of some sort of task we might want to automate is when we first get into the competition, we've never seen this environment before, right? We're coming in with our eyes completely closed, right? So we want to understand what we're given, what is on our system, what services are running and whatnot. So we have an inventory script that is the first thing that runs. And that essentially tells us everything about the computer. Is it joined to an Active Directory domain? what services are running, what processes are running, what interesting files are there, what users and groups are there, what software is installed, what packages are installed. Because you can install not only software just arbitrarily, but you can also just go into Windows and it has some, not necessarily package management, but it can install software for you, such as SSH. If you want to install SSH on your computer, you're not going to just go to a website and install it. Windows can install SSH for you through their implementation. So we want to know everything about the operating system, so we just run a little script that just gives all of that information for us, saves it to a file, and then we can reference that throughout the competition, like maybe, you know, an hour or two later, we see something suspicious, and we want to know, hey, has that been there the whole time? And we'll check it against our inventory script. So yeah, good question, Noble. Anything else before I make another shameless CCDC plug? All right, so if you want to learn more about this, come to CCDC tryouts from 4 to 6 tonight. And we've got some neat little labs that you can try out to learn not only more about Windows, but also Linux and networking. Even if you're not actually interested in the CCDC team, definitely show up because the labs are really cool and we put a lot of time into them to try to make sure you guys can learn useful things that you can take and use in job interviews or just, you know, for your personal knowledge. 2730 and 2740, Golisano, the classrooms upstairs from 4 to 6 tonight. Yeah, thanks, Luca. Yeah, I think I just said 9. Yeah, you get them for both. Yeah, right? Am I wrong, Adam? You get them for both.
For what?
The rewards.
Oh, we can check this sheet.
Yeah.
Actually, no, Hayden runs that.
Didn't see it.
Let me announce the thing. All right, guys, it's demo time. The VM download for demos, I'll remind you guys again. If you want to find that, it's in the demo help announcements channel. If you want to download the VM, is this on? No? Oh, it is. Okay. If you want to download the VM for the demos, check out demo help announcements channel. If you guys have any questions about any of the demos, raise your hand. Either another upperclassman or an e-board member, someone will come around and help you guys out the best we can. But yeah, have fun.